One.
Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host Alan Sakin, and today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Paul Shapiro.
It's my pleasure, Alan.
Boom.
Boom.
Yeah, baby. This is going to be a lot of fun. Paul Shapiro is definitely one of the global leaders in a really important movement, something that we do 3 times a day. We eat food and clean meat. This is going to be a good in-depth conversation about that. We'll talk about other things like clean leather, other sustainable products, and how we're moving away from using animals it's a post-animal bioeconomy.
Nice.
I love that one.
You down with the lingo.
Yeah,
I like it, Alan.
Ryan Bethencourt taught me that.
Oh, good. Yes, yes. Very good. Well, you've been well taught already. You have a great master with you, right, with Ryan.
Exactly. Paul Shapiro founded Compassion Over Killing, and then he was a vice president at the Humane Society of the United States, and now he's the author of Clean Meat. And this is an amazing book. This book will walk you down and up all over the industry, where it's been, where it's going, and some of the coolest parts about it. It used to cost $3 billion to get a genome sequenced. Now it's down to a couple thousand. It used to cost $3 billion to make an iPhone. Now it costs just a couple hundred. Same thing with clean meat now. It used to cost millions of dollars. Now we're down to, hopefully by 2020, just $10 for a nice big clean meat burger.
What a world that would be, huh?
We're getting there.
Yeah.
So Paul, walk us through, you went through the industry all over, the book walks you down all over the industry, and you've been in it for so long. Take us down this journey and what you've learned and the significance of it for society.
Sure. So it's a very nascent field. I mean, the first company that was ever founded for the sole purpose of commercializing clean meat was Memphis Meats just 2 years ago. So we are still in the infancy of this industry, but it's an idea that's been around for a long time. In fact, even going back to 1931, you had Winston Churchill writing this essay predicting what the world would look like in 50 years' time. And one of the predictions he had was that we would escape the absurdity of raising whole animals rather than just growing the meat that we actually wanted. So now, Churchill looks to have been a few decades off, but his actual prophecy remains very important. And what was once science fiction is now science fact, with a slew of companies being founded in the last couple years racing to commercialize the world's first ever meat and other animal products that are grown without animals. Now think about the importance of that, because for millennia, the only way that we have had meat has been from animals' bodies. Yes, we have alternatives to meat, but the only way to have real meat has been from slaughtering animals. Now we're on the verge of divorcing meat production from livestock raising, with enormous benefits being associated with it. One, you have the obvious benefit to the animals, that you can avert an enormous amount of animal cruelty. Two, you have huge food safety benefits, because think about the...
You're good.
All right. So think about the food safety benefits. Right now, you have a plague in the meat industry of E. coli, salmonella, campylobacter. These are intestinal pathogens. But with clean meat, when you're growing the meat, you're just growing the muscle. You're not growing intestines at all. So you don't have to worry so much about those type of intestinal pathogens. In fact, right now, we're warned to treat raw meat almost like toxic waste in our kitchen. Why? Because it's riddled with feces. When you have E. coli, you have to cook the crap out of your meat, literally. You're literally cooking the crap out of it to make it safe for you to consume. But with clean meat, you have huge food safety advantages on that sense. And then also, it's clean meat because it's like clean energy. It's much cleaner than the conventional way that we've been getting meat in the past. Far fewer resources needed. In fact, one study out of Oxford found that to produce clean beef compared to conventional beef, you're talking about 99% less land, 96% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and over 90% less water use as well. So there's a whole host of reasons that we want to do this.
Yes. So the first major one is that the ethics around slaughtering other beings, other conscious beings, animals, and then the second one is the pure cleanly aspect to it, E. coli, salmonella, the diseases that, I totally agree, handling meat in the kitchen, all that kind of stuff, cooking the crap out of it. Yeah, and then thirdly is just the whole slew of, you're right, the water savings, greenhouse gas savings,
Right. I mean, think about it. The planet is not getting any bigger, but humanity's footprint on it is. Right now, we have 7.5 billion of us walking around, and by 2050, we're likely to add a couple more billion. How are we going to feed all of us? I mean, right now, meat consumption on a per capita basis is like this, not like this. And I wish it would go down. Mm-hmm. We would be better off for public health, for environment, for animal welfare, all types of reasons why we want to reduce meat consumption. But in the areas that have the fastest population growth, they tend to also have the highest growth of demand for meat as well. And so if we want to be able to feed humanity the meat that people seem to want in the coming decades, we're going to have to get a lot more efficient about how we produce it, and growing meat as opposed to raising and slaughtering animals is one way to do that.
I like how you called it divorcing. That's a really good way to understand it, divorcing it from the animal completely, but still eating meat.
Yes. In fact, I've joked before that you might see in the future environmental groups having slogans that say things like, eat meat, not animals. And
that is a good one. I saw that in the book. That's a good one.
You know, you think about it like this. So 150 years ago, the only way that we had to get ice was naturally formed ice that we harvested from lakes and would ship it all around the world. That was it for millennia. The only way any human ever had ice was ice that was formed in nature. Mm-hmm. Then enter the advent of industrial refrigeration. Now all of a sudden you have a much cheaper and more efficient way to get ice just by cooling the water down right in front of you. And the natural ice industry was livid over this innovation. They were railed against what they called artificial ice, saying that it was unsafe, it was unnatural, you didn't want to put that in your drink because you weren't sure if it was going to sicken you, when the irony at the time was that actually the so-called artificial ice was much safer because you didn't have to worry about pollution in the water, or they were taking ice using horses who were dragging it out of the lakes, and you know, it's not like horses are holding it in while they're taking this ice out of the lake. Whereas when you're filtering the water and then or boiling it and then freezing it, it's much safer. Yeah. But the end result is still ice. It's the same exact product. And that's what clean meat is like. The end result is just meat. It's safer and cleaner, but it is just meat. It's not an alternative to meat. It's not some type of a substitute for meat. It is actual meat.
Exactly.
And instead of being taken from nature, it is being done through a scientific innovation in the same way that we have ice today. Now we all have artificial ice makers in our homes. We call them freezers. And we don't think there's anything unnatural about it at all. In fact, you probably wouldn't even consider using ice that had been naturally formed in a lake. I mean, I wouldn't need it, would you?
Possibly.
Maybe. Wow.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe up north, Greenland, up north.
But what about like New York, where the big industry was?
Probably not from Central Park somewhere. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
But exactly. That's a really good comparison. There's so many other really good analogies like that. Let's dive into what you said earlier, because this is crucial. A lot of people are starting to eat like the United States does, and that has become people, especially like Asian countries that typically consumed more grains, starting to consume more meat. Right. And this isn't even the population, including the population boom that we are about to see out of Africa in the next 10, 20 years. So the developing world is going to want to consume meat, and to be able to produce it sustainably in bioreactors, safely, environmentally friendly with less water, less energy. This is a crucial advancement. It's coming right at the right time, kind of.
I think you're right, Alan, and I would go so far as to say that in the same way that in many sub-Saharan African countries have they skipped over the landline phase of telephone communication. They went straight to cellular communication. So now lots of people in Africa have cell phones, and they never had landlines. You don't see those wires crisscrossing to every single home. In the same way that cellular phone technology revolutionized communication on the African continent, cellular agriculture technology may do the same, where instead of having huge amounts of corn and soy being grown to feed all these farm animals and massive slaughter plants, and farms, you then would just have basically your own localized clean meat production, where you would have, you could even envision artisanal clean meats being made with local operators doing their own types of clean meat. And I think that you would have a revolution in food and nutrition production in the same way that you did with communications.
I was so shocked when I heard about that. I can have my own little microbrewery. What did you call it? A carnivory?
A carnery, yeah.
A carnery.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So think about it this way. So right now, it's not remarkable for somebody to come over to your home and see that you have an ice cream maker or a bread maker. Well, what if you had a meat maker?
Yeah.
What if you could order little tea bags of stem cells and drop them in and produce your own meat? And in fact, one Japanese clean meat startup has a project that they call the Shojin Meat Project, and they're already giving Tokyo high school students microwave-sized meat makers that they take home and can grow their own meat in these little meat makers. Now, they're not producing meat that you would think is that delicious. It's kind of like blobs of meat. It's like very prototypical. But you can see if in 2018 they're already doing that, what might be happening in, let's say, 2028.
Yeah. So let's talk about the science, how it's actually occurring, just from a very 10,000-foot view.
Sure.
So how do we actually take and grow clean meat?
So imagine right now that if you burn your right arm by accident, you can take a tiny little biopsy from the skin on your left arm, and we can grow your skin. Not just human skin, Alan's actual skin, genetically identical to your skin, because it is your skin, and then put it in the wound on your other arm, and your body accepts it because it's your skin. In the same way, we could do that with your muscle, and that's what people eat. Not necessarily Homo sapiens muscle, but they do eat a lot of cow and chicken muscle and fish muscle and so on. So here's how it works. Imagine taking a very tiny sesame seed-sized biopsy from a cow. And inside of that tiny little biopsy, there are millions of cells that are called satellite cells. The only path for their careers ever will be to produce muscle. They are the cells that go to work when you do a hard workout or you get injured. They go and repair the damage that is done, and they create more muscle. So the only thing they can ever do is become more muscle. You take those cells, put them in a cultivator so they think they're still in the animal's body. Same temperature, you give them the same type of food they would be eating in the body, and they do just what they would be doing in the body, except outside of it, which is produce muscle. So in a very real way, what we're doing is growing real muscle outside of the animal's body that is the same exact food that would be inside, except just done in a sterile, far safer environment and with far fewer resources to produce that same amount of meat.
And so then that's the option where we take the small biopsy from muscle biopsy, and then let's quickly talk about what are the nutrients, what's the environment like for it to actually be able to grow into a large amount of that muscle biopsy.
Well, one of the
how quickly, as well.
So you can, depends on how much space you have, but you can do this within weeks. But one of the cool things is, so you want it to be the same temperature as the animal's body. What that means is, so you have to use some energy, of course, to keep it at whatever body temperature that species has. But with cold-blooded animals like fish, that means you need far less energy because you don't need so much heat to keep them warm. So it's actually far more efficient to grow clean fish than, let's say, clean pork or clean beef. But
those run at closer to human.
Closer, because mammals are warm-blooded.
Yeah, and so, fish is like 40 Fahrenheit or.
I don't know the exact, 50? But it's probably around that. I mean,
cool.
It's probably not that different from what you're suggesting.
Way less energy for fish.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. However, you have to feed them. And for the last 130 years that we've been culturing cells, a typical feed for the cells has been what's called some type of animal serum, whether it's a bovine fetal serum, which is particularly gnarly in terms of how they get it. I mean, you're talking about a fetal calf who at the slaughter plant is taken out of the dead mother, and then you extract serum from that animal's heart. So not exactly the most ethical thing, but two, it's also extremely expensive. I mean, you're talking about like $500 per liter of this fetal bovine serum. So in the medical space, they've not been concerned about the cost because people will pay a lot of money for medical therapies. But in the food application space, people are not willing to pay a lot of money for food. So while clean meat is generally borrowing techniques from the medical space, they need to innovate and bring the cost way down and feed the cells something else that is not only more ethical but also far, far more economical. So companies like Hampton Creek, or what's called Just, or Memphis Meats and others have been experimenting with ways that they can feed the cells usually plant-based ingredients that will keep the cells happy and proliferating while at the same time being very economical. And in fact, Nick Genovese, who is a lead scientist at Memphis Meats, published in the journal Nature his own recipe for a serum-free feed for the cells.
And what do you know what that was?
A lot of it is synthetic. However, it's still too expensive. I mean, you still have to keep getting it down, but it's moving in the right direction. And if you look at all of the money that has been spent on clean meat research, you're talking about merely tens of millions of dollars. Yeah. I mean, virtually nothing compared to what the need is. And so in the future, hopefully in coming years, you'll see hundreds of millions of dollars more being put into R&D to create this new industry. Yeah. The good news is that many of the big meat giants like Tyson Foods and Cargill are now invested in Memphis Meats, and so they can help them with this.
Yeah. And so then it also, in that, it's great to have organizations like Cargill and Tyson, such massive giants, getting involved, Branson and Gates getting involved, all that good stuff. And you're right, it's just the beginning with tens of millions versus hundreds and even billions of dollars. And that's when it's going to be everywhere, easy, fast, safe, all that good stuff. So when you take the small muscle biopsy and then you feed it what's needed, I really enjoyed understanding the exponential growth of cell division. Because then it actually ends up growing really quickly into the amount that you need. Yeah, you can grow it much faster than you could if you were raising an animal. I mean, a cow you don't slaughter for like 1 or 2 years, depending on a variety of factors. With this, within weeks, you can have the meat. And you're right, what starts out with one cell division, a day and a half later, you are now starting to see that exponential growth. And so once you get the process going, it actually takes less time to produce more meat than it did at the very beginning. About 30 days to double every single, 1 turns 2, 2, 4, 4, 8.
Oh, it's
8
much
cells.
Yeah, it's much less than that. These cells are dividing often like every 30 hours.
Did I say days?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Hours.
That's all right.
30 hours.
Right.
Yeah. So 1.5 days exactly between cell divisions, which is amazing.
Right.
It's exponential.
Right. So the big problem, or one of the problems these companies face now, though, is that they're able to produce ground meat. So think like chicken nuggets, hot dogs, hamburgers, sausage. They're not able to produce a chicken breast or a sirloin steak because those thick cuts of meat inside the animal's body, there are blood vessels, and the blood vessels bring nutrients to the cells. Whereas if you try to do that in clean meat production today, the cells on the inside go necrotic because they don't have any way to bring the nutrients into them. And so the real key is to figure out how can these companies replicate blood vessels in the meat. Maybe they can use microbeads that bring nutrients in between the cells, or maybe there's something else that they can do. Frankly, they're not really sure how they're going to do it. But for now, ground meat is still a huge portion of the meat that we eat.
And that just means that we won't be able to get this exact formula for maybe what looks like a breast as soon as possible.
That's right.
The ground meat is much easier to make. It doesn't need this breast-shaped form or steak-shaped form.
That's exactly right. Theoretically, they can do it. It's just a matter of actually putting it in practice, and nobody has done that yet.
And then what are the alternatives as well to taking the muscle biopsy? Because you had acellular agriculture.
Oh, I'm so impressed now. Nice.
Just a beginner level here.
Okay, so there's 2 different types of clean animal product production. There is cellular agriculture, which is where you have the division of cells that are producing this muscle. Then you have what's called acellular agriculture, where you have cells that are producing the molecules that you want. So let me give you an example. Right now, if you take baker's yeast and you add sugar to it, then you produce CO2 to make your bread rise. If you take brewer's yeast, you add sugar to it, and you'll get alcohol as a byproduct. There are now certain types of designer yeasts that companies like Perfect Day and Geltor and Clara Foods are using, where you feed them the sugar, and what they produce is dairy proteins or egg proteins or collagen, which is what you can make gelatin from.
So you can design the yeast.
That's right.
To make with Clara Foods egg whites.
Yeah, egg white proteins. That's exactly
proteins.
right. Yeah. So interestingly enough, Perfect Day, which is a dairy platform company, just brought in $25 million in their Series A to do just that. What they're making are real dairy proteins, whey and casein and other dairy proteins. And what they do is they take the yeast that they've designed and feed it sugar, and it produces those proteins. So it's not a dairy alternative. It is literally actually dairy proteins, and you never had any cow, not even a biopsy from a cow. You're getting, I mean, it's almost like, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free, right? Well, why buy the cow when you can get the yeast to produce the milk for you? And so the yeast doesn't remain in the final product. They put it in a centrifuge, so you just have the pure dairy proteins. It's not like beer where the yeast remains in. So you don't have any of the yeast in there. The product is still labeled GMO-free, but it is a real dairy protein or real egg white proteins. Or in the case of Geltor, which is a really cool company, they're making real gelatin without animals. In fact, for this book, Clean Meat, they even made the world's first ever book bound in clean leather.
Yep.
So they created real leather, cow-free of course, through their process and bound one copy of this book in lab-grown leather. And we put it up on eBay for the world's first lab-grown leather-bound book ever, and one lucky bidder prevailed and got it for $13,000, and now has it on his shelf at home.
That's so nice, and that's one of many. I just can't get over this, like designing yeast to not even use the animal, acellular agriculture. And then, so let's wander down the leather conversation. We have Geltor, we have
Modern Meadow,
Modern Meadow, MycoWorks, except they're doing different things, different ways to do it. So
Well, MycoWorks is a really cool company. They are making alternatives to leather from mushrooms. And their products are amazing. You look at them, they're truly incredible, but they are an alternative to leather. It's not actual animal collagen that is being used.
Yep.
Modern Meadow, and Geltor for that matter, and another company called Vitro Labs are making actual leather that they are growing without any animals at all. And Modern Meadow is the best capitalized of any of these companies. They've brought in over $50 million in investment so far. And they started out as a meat and leather company and now have shifted to just focusing on leather. And here's the theory why. So the CEO, Andras Forgax, great guy, his argument is basically this. One, it's a lot easier to produce this leather than it is to produce meat, so he would like to do it for that reason. Leather, is really a two-dimensional product. It's the skin, whereas meat is three-dimensional, more difficult to do. His other argument,
and tastes every single day versus just wearing it.
That's right. His other argument, though, is that he thinks that people are more likely to wear novel materials than to eat novel foods, and that if you can get people accustomed to the idea of wearing lab-grown leather, will they then be more accustomed to the idea once clean meat hits the market? And so think about it. Right now, nobody thinks twice about putting Gore-Tex on or using carbon fiber, other novel human-made materials. We don't even think twice. In fact, we think they're awesome. We're like, are you serious? Like a thin thing that is comfortable and still keeps me warm? Like, that's great. We have companies now that are doing things like making spider silk via this acellular process, like Bolt and Spiber and so on. And they're making really sturdy threads that are the same as spider silk, but through the same acellular agriculture process. Modern Meadow is going to be, within the year 2018, putting some real clean leather on the market. They call it ZOA, Z-O-A. And the ZOA, I've looked at it and held it, and I mean, it's leather. It functions like leather. In fact, it has superior functionality. You can make it as thick or as thin as you want it. You can make it any shape. Cows very stubbornly do not come in the size of wallets and wristwatches and car seats. But so there's a lot of waste in the leather industry because they're cutting it into forms that you have waste leather. Exactly. Also, the cows might have scars or insect bites or branding marks on them that can make it. But when you're growing it in the lab, it's just pristine.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's huge functionality benefits to the process that companies like Modern Meadow are using.
Yeah, I remember feeling the one that MycoWorks made, and I just couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah.
I loved it. I
Yeah.
thought that was so cool. And that's through mycelium, grown but through mushrooms,
Right.
Versus grown from the
Yeast, yeah.
the yeast.
Yeah.
It just grow. How do they design a protein? Design the yeast to be able to grow dairy proteins and leather proteins.
Well, I'll tell you a story, Alan, that I think is maybe the coolest thing that I've seen. So,
Cool.
When humanity first arrived in the North American continent, we found a continent filled with lots of what are called megafauna, right? These huge animals, including the mastodon. Well, the mastodon didn't evolve around humans, and so it was very little match for us. And within a few short millennia, they were extinct. But some of them still remain today, locked away in icy graves, and we have uncovered them. And yes, they were, died off around 10, 11,000 years ago, but as with a lot of animals who you find who have been locked in ice for a long time, if there's any protein left to be found on them, it's probably collagen that will be found. And so using collagen that we've taken from mastodons who we found today, we have mapped their genome. Anybody can go online and go get the mastodon genome online. So Geltor went online, got it, and then ordered DNA which had the mastodon genome encoded in it, and then using that, produced real mastodon gelatin, and then made their own gummy candies. Now, they didn't make gummy bears. They got elephant molds and made real gummy elephant molds with mastodon gelatin and ate it. This is the first time any human has consumed mastodon protein in like over 10,000 years. This is probably the only truly paleo diet. They're eating literally what people in the Paleolithic era ate, the mastodon, and they did it. I mean, it's incredible to think that in the 21st century, they almost resurrected the mastodon. Now, we don't have them lumbering around, but they really have resurrected part of a mastodon.
And then ate it first ones in 10
it's a little ignoble that you think like we bring them back just to go eat them again. I know. The irony was not lost on me, trust me.
But that's so cool that we're at that point of figuring things out. Now, let's chat quick about you were talking about the sustainability, the savings in water, the savings in land, savings in carbon emissions, methane emissions. So, I mean, you visited a lot of places, and I don't think many people know what slaughterhouses actually look like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big life changer once you experience that dimension of reality. I was lucky enough to go as well in high school to a slaughterhouse, and it definitely changed my life forever. And there's a lot of practices there that are inhumane, so maybe walk us down just like an understanding of what actually goes on behind the scenes and why that's important to understand.
Yeah, I think so often people will say something, it just seems like unnatural to grow meat without animals. And I ask them, well, have you thought about how we produce meat today? And just take chicken as one example. Yeah. I mean, nearly all of the chicken meat consumed in the U.S. comes from birds who are genetically manipulated to grow so big, so fast, that many of them couldn't even take more than a few steps before collapsing underneath their own weight. They lived wing to wing in their own feces. They never went outside, never stepped foot on a blade of grass. They never saw the sun. And then by the time, and they're pumped full of drugs like antibiotics.
Yeah.
And then by the time they reach the slaughter plant, most people say, stop, I don't want to hear about it. Because it's very difficult to even listen to descriptions of violence against animals, let alone to witness it yourself. How many of us would like to go and watch the birds be hung upside down and have their throats slit and be submerged in vats of electrified water? And that's the standard practice. That's not the exception. I mean, animal cruelty is the rule, not the exception in today's meat industry. And so when we think about just how unnatural and inhumane and unsustainable our current methods of meat production are, clean meat all of a sudden seems far preferable. And, think about the way that clean meat will be produced. It's not even really done in a lab. We think, it's lab-grown meat. That's really inaccurate. It's really in a brewery-type setting where this will occur.
Same place you get your beer.
Yes, exactly. And so all the, you think about, I've been in food companies where they had R&D labs for peanut butter, but nobody calls that lab-grown peanut butter. I've been, everything from cornflakes to every product that we're eating in this process started in a lab, but then it gets moved into a factory or brewery type setting, and it's produced for us to consume. And the same is so here. We'll have breweries, again, maybe called carneries, and you can envision them being even localized, like every neighborhood having their own clean meat brewery, perhaps, and you can envision them being much closer to an urban environment because nobody wants a slaughterhouse near them. Who wants to live near a slaughterhouse? Nobody does. But it would actually be kind of cool to
taste at the carnery, taste all the different ways that the clean meat's being made, and
these companies like Just and like Memphis Meats envision having literal glass walls. Now, you just try to get a tour of a slaughter plant. Most people, even if they could get in, wouldn't want to, but they probably are going to have a difficult time even getting in. And the clean meat purveyors, though, are psyched to have people come. They want them to come and see how it's doing. This is an industry that believes in radical transparency because they think that when people see how their meat is being made, they're going to be even more enthusiastic about eating it.
The transparency, the glass walls, that's a crucial part. Again, the carnery, that's an exciting aspect of the experience. You asked the question at the beginning after I asked you the question, which was, where does your meat come from, or where does your food come from? And just that question in itself, I think, is a very simulation-esque question to ask people. It's kind of like one of our themed thoughts that we have that we try and share with people that watch the show is really go down the chain of events that get you to the point where you're at or where someone's at. When you're having a conversation with someone and maybe there's a little bit of dissonance, you guys disagree on something, go down the chain of events. What is their life journey? Ask them about it. What led them to the opinion that they have? Same thing with the meat as well. Where did the meat actually come from? Walk down the whole chain of the animal being raised and then what actually happened until that point. So understanding the chain of events that lead up to a certain thing is just a really important way to expand your mind to those new dimensions.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Alan. And in my experience, the more people do that, the more they learn about how meat is actually produced, the less comfortable they are. And that's a pretty good litmus test for us.
Exactly.
The more you learn, the less comfortable you are. It's probably time to start rethinking our behavior. For me, I decided a long time ago, we don't have to kill animals. We really can survive just fine on a plant-based diet. It's healthy, it's good for the planet, it's good for us. I'm happy to eat plants. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people want to eat meat, and I think clean meat and plant-based meats, too, are a great solution to satiate that craving. But when I first learned about how cruelty is endemic in the meat industry and how animals are subjected to practices that are so inhumane that they would be criminal if the victims were dogs or cats.
Exactly.
Just think about it. Right now, if a burglar came into your home and found a nice painting of a pig on your wall and smashed that painting, he could get a greater sentence for destroying your property than a pig farmer would get for smashing a piglet who isn't growing fast enough on his own farm. The fact that you can get in greater legal trouble for smashing a painting of a pig than an actual pig just speaks volumes about how little legal protection farm animals have. And the fact that they have so little legal protection means that animal cruelty is the norm. Now, piglet smashing is a customary practice on pig farms for animals who aren't growing fast enough or who are sick. But even more endemic is a practice, let's say, like cutting their genitals off with that painkiller, which happens on a daily basis on these places where pigs and calves have their testicles cut off without any pain relief. And if that were done to a dog, you'd be charged with felony animal cruelty. But the fact that victims are pigs who feel pain with every bit as much of intensity as dogs, it means it's a standard industry practice. Now, this is why we say that people eat meat with their eyes squeezed shut. Most people don't eat meat because of how it is produced. They eat meat in spite of how it is produced. And when there is an alternative, like clean meat available, that can obviate all of these types of concerns about animal cruelty and so many other problems, from food safety to environmental and so on, I think people are going to be thrilled to switch, and they'll have a lot less cognitive dissonance when thinking about the types of things that we've just been talking about.
Yeah, when you're in the grocery store and you just see bacon, but the bacon didn't even come from a slaughtered pig. It just says bacon, and then you eat it, and it tastes just like the actual bacon does.
Right.
And it's completely clean meat, and I think that is absolutely a beautiful future that we're heading to. And
one hopes.
Right there in the grocery store, or right there at the carnery, this new micro brewery.
From your lips to the simulation creator's ears, you know. I hope whoever created the simulation makes that happen.
Yeah. We didn't touch on this other one as well, which I think is important. We have the small sesame seed muscle biopsy version. We have the acellular agricultural version, where it's designed with yeast and brewed with yeast, and we get it that way. And then we have what is like the Beyond Meat style. What is that? And
sure.
Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, so Beyond Meat, which is a fantastic company, is using all plant-based. There's no animal cells whatsoever in their burgers or chicken or anything. But they have taken plant-based meats to a new era. So if you look, for example, at the veggie burger of old, let's say 10 years ago, it is just not on the same planet as the Beyond Burger of today. And one presumes 10 years from now, the Beyond Burgers today are going to be looked back on similarly as archaic. But for now, they're fantastic. I mean, they're so good. And so many people who eat them think this tastes like meat. It's not actual meat. It's much healthier for you. It's much better for the planet. It's an alternative to meat, but it really does look and taste like meat. In the same way, for example, that my belt is not actual leather, but it really does look like you probably couldn't tell by looking at this belt.
Right. Zero.
And so this is a non-leather belt that looks like leather. The Beyond Burger is a plant-based burger that looks and tastes like a burger. Now, their main competitor is a company called Impossible Foods, which also has a very good plant-based burger, but they are using that same acellular technology to produce what's called heme in their product. So they argue at Impossible Foods that heme is the magic ingredient that makes meat taste like meat. It's this very iron-rich molecule that basically helps to in a variety of ways for taste and mouthfeel. So the heme is produced by Impossible Foods through acellular agriculture, so that they are producing real heme that is the same as heme that is in a burger, but via microorganisms. And then they add that to their plant-based burger, and they assert that it makes it taste much more meat-like. I've had both of them many times. I like them both. I think they're both very good. I have a preference for the Beyond Burger, but I have many friends who feel opposite.
Yeah,
and so
they're both good.
Yeah, they're both excellent. They really are. But it's interesting to see the blending of acellular technologies with plant-based foods, and I think that you're going to see that for the first products, the first clean meat products that come out. It would not surprise me at all if they were blends. If they were blends of plant-based meat to keep the cost down, along with clean meat, so that you have something that is actual animal muscle.
And what are we typically using for the plant-based meat right now?
Well, peas are all the rage right now.
Peas.
Yeah, so pea protein is the big thing. In the past, it has been a lot of soy or wheat protein, and that is still in some brands, and I like them. I think they're very good. But pea protein, for a variety of reasons, has emerged currently as the winner.
Let's talk about why,
Well, one, there's a little bit of a scare around soy. I think it's completely unfounded. I think it's a total myth, but people argue about phytoestrogens in soy. The evidence is pretty clear that phytoestrogens actually are quite healthy, and they suppress cancer. So I think people are doing themselves a real disservice by not eating soy. But there is that concern. Then you also have the so-called scare about wheat. Gluten-free is all the rage in some circles. People believe that they are sensitive to gluten. It turns out only about 1% of us actually have celiac, but maybe there are people who are sensitive to gluten for some reason. But the fact that soy and wheat have these connotations associated with them, true or false, and the fact that they also are common allergens, has led to a real rise in pea protein, because pea protein, one, is very versatile. It's considered this good, clean protein. It's not a common allergen. It's still inexpensive enough. It's not as cheap as soy or wheat, but it is still fairly inexpensive. And that's why you're seeing it used in so many different products.
Pea protein has emerged on top.
For now, but most plant proteins have not even been sequenced. I mean, it's this world that is open to us that, who knows? I mean, Hampton Creek, for example, now is making its Just Scramble out of mung bean protein isolate.
Mung bean.
Mung bean. So mung beans very popular in Asia. People in Asia eat lots of mung beans. People here probably have never even eaten a mung bean. However, mung bean protein isolate is so new in the United States that they had to file with the FDA just to get it approved as a generally recognized as safe ingredient, which they did. And it's just mung beans. That's it. It's just you take the protein from a mung bean and you put it in the food.
But scrambled, just scramble.
That's right. So the Just Scramble, which the new Just product, which you can get at a restaurant here in San Francisco now, and hopefully in cafeterias across the country soon. The primary ingredient is mung bean protein. So maybe we'll see mung bean burgers in the near future. We'll see.
Yeah. So plant-based is also exploding. Acellular is exploding. Clean meat grown from muscle biopsies exploding.
Yeah.
This is awesome. There's a bunch of different ones that are intertwining a bit and saving a lot of agricultural variables that are going into the growth factor, environment, water, sustainability with land, all this good stuff, and we're going to be able to feed the future generations.
That's the goal.
Yeah. And just the straight ethics. This might lead us into a couple small simulation conversations, but just within the ethics, this is always very interesting to me to think about an advanced civilization and what they do with their beings that are less advanced than they are, similar to what we do with the beings that are less advanced than we are. So shouldn't we at least have some ethical consideration for being, because we don't want
even if our own self-interest, right? I mean, I actually think about this quite often, how would an advanced civilization treat us? And the analogy that folks have used, like Sam Harris and others, seems particularly apt to me. I doubt that they would come here to enslave and exploit us, but I do think they would be relatively indifferent to our interests in the same way that we don't consider an ant colony. So right now, imagine there is an ant colony on some land, and we decide we want to build a house there. It's not like we're hostile toward ants. We don't want to harm it. It's not like we build the house to harm the ants. But we don't consider that we've wiped out their civilization in any way. We just build the house without even a second thought. And I suspect that an alien civilization might have a similar... They might be, if they got here, that means they're very far advanced from where we are technologically. I would imagine we would be the equivalent of ants to them. That they, it's not like they hate ants, but they just don't care that much about us. I hope that if they've gotten so far
advanced and they have some ethical consideration.
Right. Yeah, and that's Carl Sagan's argument, that he thinks that if you can make it through that bottleneck of the growth of a civilization, that you must have some level of empathy and compassion, that you can, basically, if you can make it through that first phase of a civilization without blowing yourself up.
Which we are kind of right now in that phase.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we are if this is so, there are other civilizations out there that they made it through the bottleneck, we are the new kid on the block. I mean, we have only been able to do anything outside of our planet for such a short amount of time. I mean, like that. And you think about the other civilizations, if they are out there, presumably they have been doing it for millennia. Or longer, maybe millions of years, who knows?
Correct.
And so I would hope that they would have some type of a rule like the Prime Directive in Star Trek, how you basically don't interfere or intervene or harm the inhabitants of the cosmos as you're traveling through. And in some senses, we have that, at least in law. So the UN has an Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and that requires us to avoid harmful contamination of celestial bodies. And so at NASA, they actually have an Office of Interplanetary Protection.
Correct.
And that Office of Interplanetary Protection, yes, it's to avoid harming ourselves by bringing back some, like an Andromeda strain type event, but it's also to protect them. When we go to Mars, we sterilize our rovers, and there's some instruments that are so sensitive that we can't send them. We want to send them, but they can't withstand the baking before we send them to Mars. And so we're harming our own scientific efforts because of our concern for contaminating Mars. Now, you could argue we're doing it because we want to protect the integrity of our scientific experiments up there. We don't want to discover life there just to find that we brought it there ourselves. But we're also concerned about preventing extinctions on Mars. I mean, that seems pretty noble to me, that we don't even know if life is there, and we are taking precautions to avoid causing extinctions on Mars or other places we may land rovers. That, to me, seems like we ought to pat ourselves on the back for that. I mean, we don't seem that concerned about preventing extinctions here on Earth, but at least on Mars, that's pretty good. So for a species that doesn't have a good track record when it comes to causing harm, I would say that's a bright light. NASA's policy is a bright light, and hopefully we can see more of that.
Yeah. Is there as we talk about Earth and the potential extinction level events that occur in this bottleneck, what are your thoughts about the current state of maybe wealth inequality, geopolitical fighting?
Well, I think we're closer to catastrophe than we have been in a long time now. I do buy into the Steven Pinker argument that things are better now than they ever have been for humans, at least. And he's pretty clear this isn't true for animals. I mean, for non-human animals, things are really worse than they've ever been. And so if you take the interests of other species seriously, considering that there are tens of billions of them individually, it's sad. So,
and then 1 million chickens being slaughtered in the U.S. every hour.
Right, every hour. Yeah. And these are, and I would point out that their slaughter is the best day of their lives. It's the day their misery finally comes to an end. For most animals on factory farms, their interests are best served in that sense because they're being tormented for so long that finally when they're killed, as violent and painful as it is, at least their suffering ends. So, I'm even more concerned. I'm concerned about the slaughter, but I'm more concerned about the months prior to slaughter that they spend languishing.
And stressing the meat that we end up eating and taking on their stress.
So anyway, though, to answer your question directly, I think that there are real concerns about nuclear war where you have two people with nuclear arsenals who I don't think it would be that unreasonable to be worried about what they might do. I mean,
absolutely.
The leaders of the U.S. and North Korea right now are in a showdown that I think is probably among the most important things that's happening, and yet you don't see it as much in the news. I mean, we see lots of other important things in the news, but things that do not pose existential risks to every nation on the planet, basically. In fact, if you were to only have news that focused on the most important things going on right now, you would see a lot of it dominated by that nuclear threat, I think.
You think nuclear is a very big threat? It absolutely is.
Yeah.
What do you think about 8 people having as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion people?
Yeah.
What do we do about that?
Far from me to be a pundit on something I'm not an expert on. Clearly, I think it's a big problem. I think it poses severe instability risks where you have such a dramatic disparity in wealth and power in that sense. But what I would suggest I would be even more concerned about in terms of actually existential risk would be having, let's say, 8 people who have the capacity to grow some type of a virus in their basement. That, to me, is another real risk, because the gene editing has become so democratized and so inexpensive that people can do things that only governments could do before. And when you have that capacity, even if it's just by accident, even if it's not somebody who is maliciously doing it, you have a real threat. You look at the 1918 Spanish flu as an example. That killed between 50 to 100 million people. And that was in a time before, one, there was only around 1 billion people on the planet, and 2, you didn't have the type of global travel that we have today.
Yeah.
Imagine if another strain like that naturally arose, or if it arose unnaturally through a human-made virus. Again, intentionally or unintentionally. That, to me, is a real threat, and is one of the reasons why I am enthusiastic about the work of agencies like IARPA, which is one of the federal intelligence agencies, which is designed to try to prevent those types of things from happening in the future by predicting when they might actually happen. And there's an interesting intersection, because the guy who runs IARPA is a guy named Jason Matheny, who spent the earlier portion of his career being a clean meat prophet. In fact, he founded New Harvest, which is a group that promotes clean meat, and then he left the clean meat field because he was so concerned about existential threats, and now is running the agency of IARPA to prevent these type of civilizationally threatening events like asteroid collisions or viruses and so on.
And you named some right there: asteroid collision, virus, nuclear war. There's so many of them. The instability from wealth inequality. There's so many of these things that are going on right now that just we love talking about with our guests, because if we can increase the amount of conversations that occur about these topics, I think it'll drive more action.
I hope.
To the future.
I think, because we have lived in such a time of abundance for us, and where we live, and how we really struck the lottery, like we won the jackpot in amazing ways. I think we get a little bit complacent, and we think this is how it'll always be, because this is how it's been for our whole lives. And we forget that our civilization, that's like the veneer. Like, imagine that food transportation stopped for a few days. What would happen?
Exactly.
I mean, the reversion
energy stopped.
Right. The reversion to a tribal state would be extremely quick. And so I think it's a good party while it lasts. But I think we need to
do everything possible to make sure the lights don't go out at the
That's right. That's exactly right. And imagine if we have clean meat and that happens, and there still is some way to run those plants. Imagine the fight that will be to keep the meat churning in that sense.
Exactly. Are there other aspects about clean meat that you want to discuss before we go into more simulation question depth?
I would just suggest that I think it's among the single most pressing problems that humanity faces right now is this problem of animal agriculture.
Agreed.
It is a leading cause of deforestation, air, water, soil pollution, climate change, and so on. So often when people who think along the lines of the questions that you're asking are thinking, they're thinking about the important questions that we've just been addressing, from nuclear war to asteroids to viruses to wealth inequality and so on. But animal agriculture belongs up there. This is a huge threat to us. It is destroying the planet in ways that few other things are. Nothing else. I mean, the fossil fuels are obviously a huge problem as well. But in the same way that we have this race to produce clean energy, we need a race to produce clean meat. And there's billions of dollars going into finding clean energy sources, and that isn't happening yet in clean meat, and it needs to be happening.
Very eloquently said. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We're talking satellite views of just deforestation, and we're talking about emissions, methane emissions. We're talking about just vast swaths of animals that are suffering throughout their lives and then being slaughtered. You're absolutely right. I think one of the questions that we ask on here is clean meat a viable source of food for the future? And I think it's an overwhelmingly yes, it is. And actually, I found this very interesting. In Paul's book, you describe how out of university level students, out of the polls, is around 77 or so, over 3/4 actually would probably, or they would eat clean
I'm glad you
meat.
read the book so closely, Alan. Cool. Good for you.
Absolutely. That's the only way to learn. You got to highlight the important things, and this is very much so moving into kind of the our field of 25-year-olds, and even further moving into the field of the Gen Zers that are growing up, that are thinking to themselves as well. They're learning about, this is where it comes from. There's a clean meat option. and it's becoming more and more, I think, generational to be like, oh, we know the clear answer here. We're definitely down to give it a go and to figure. Yeah, that's really healthy and powerful.
I agree, there's definitely a generational thing here going on. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to be willing to try clean meat. But even just looking at all Americans, regardless of age, a third of Americans in the latest poll say they would regularly eat clean meat.
Wow.
And another third say they would give it a try. Yeah. So at a bare minimum, really, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. And look, people, what we tell pollsters we would do and what we actually do, I think, are sometimes quite different. But it's still very promising that people are willing to say, yeah, I'd eat that. And the fact is, like, we're eating foods that are the products of technology all the time, and with good reason. And that process started the very first time somebody picked up a seed and decided to plant it rather than continuing to be a hunter-gatherer. I mean, we've been modifying our foods for so long now. Yeah. I mean, if you think that that the bananas that we were eating before we started this interview resemble in any way the bananas that existed before we domesticated them, they're bigger, they're sweeter, they have these little tiny seeds in them that you don't even recognize them as seeds. The original bananas had huge seeds in them. And so you just think about that and it's like, this is the natural extension of what we've been doing for millennia. Basically making food better, seemingly more convenient for us and tastier. Yeah,
exactly. Ron, what are your thoughts about clean meat? Would you give it a go?
Oh, of course I would.
Nice.
Even though I I had that burger last night before I went to bed, and I was thinking how I was failing. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing and eating.
Yeah, well,
beef.
Ron, think about it this way. So I, of course, agree. I think you'd be better off getting a Beyond Burger. I think they're awesome. I highly recommend them. They're only $2.99 a burger at your local supermarket. They're really good.
We need to get them on our sponsorship program.
All right, no more freebies for them. However, so often we make choices as consumers that don't align with our ethics because we do what all people do, which is revert to convenience. I mean, I think about clothing. You go to, let's say, Target, and you see a t-shirt, it's only $7. You're like, damn, this is a good price, I'm going to get this shirt. You're not thinking about like the kids in Bangladesh who made that shirt. And if you did, you probably wouldn't be that comfortable with it, but we just buy it because it's the cheapest thing. In fact, you might even vote to ban the sale of sweatshop produced goods. If you could, as a citizen, go vote on that question, you'd probably vote to ban it.
But then with your money, you probably don't vote.
That's right. Yeah. We act very differently as consumers than we do as citizens. And
the cultural programming in that sense is very interesting, where we go with our money.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we would do. I mean, that's what nearly all of us do, myself included.
When 99% of the food options for meat are not clean meat, you gotta go take 1 hour more of your time, a half hour there, a half hour back, just to get the actual thing, until it proliferates to all grocery stores and all restaurants.
Right. Well, the good news is that you now have plant-based meats in all grocery stores. So,
it's getting there.
At least in the major chains like Safeway and Kroger and so on.
And you can try it, like you said, today, to go taste plant-based meats and get a little bit of that inspiration for what is going to be coming right around the corner. And Ron, you have a thought?
I love mushrooms. I know that you can do a lot with mushrooms. A portobello mushroom, a big portobello mushroom is like a tender steak.
Yeah, it does. It's used as a burger. The portobello mushroom top's used as a burger, actually, for in many vegetable burgers. And then mushrooms are also used for structural material, leather, all this amazing stuff.
Yeah, and in fact, to bring the beginning around, you were talking about our friend Ryan Bethencourt at the top of this interview, and Ryan has now started his own company, Wild Earth, that is from mycelium, which are like the roots of mushrooms, making pet food. And so mushrooms are really versatile. It's pretty cool to think about not just plant-based but fungi-based foods and other things you can make with them. And you can see ways that we can help save the planet through a whole new realm of production. It's really cool.
I'm really happy that you expanded my mind to the new dimension of putting animal agriculture into the same category as the other major existential conversational points. That's really important for me to fully have grasped that importance.
Yeah, so here, I mean, one, it's clearly true. I mean, it is just, I mean, such a driver of so many of the problems that we face. But at the same time, lots of the things that we put into that category of some of the biggest problems that humanity faces are things that an individual can do very little about. There's very little you or I can do about the nuclear showdown between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. There is very little I can do about preventing some madman with an asteroid or a madman with a molecular biology lab in his basement. And so I theorize that animal agriculture often is not in that list simply because it produces more cognitive dissonance than the others. It's very easy for us to say, oh yes, these are problems that our leaders need to address, our policymakers need to address. Whereas with animal agriculture, you don't point your finger outward. I mean, yeah, we do need our leaders to address it, but we point our finger inward because we're eating it every single day of our lives. And so I think there's more cognitive dissonance, and it's harder to grasp that we are part of the problem. But once we can allow ourselves the ability to imagine a world in which we're not so dependent on animal agriculture, it becomes easier to think, actually, yeah, this is a real problem. And it's similar in some respects, not that I'm morally equating them, but just in terms of a comparison. The northern states in the U.S. were able to ban slavery legislatively. You didn't require war to do it. The reason is because their economies were not so dependent on slavery anymore because they were industrializing. It's not like they were just morally superior. Their economies had gone toward industrial, and so they didn't have this agriculture economy that was based on human bondage. And so for them, it was easier to develop anti-slavery sentiment because there wasn't as much cognitive dissonance. If you lived in the South, though, and your economy depended on the enslavement of people, you would all of a sudden come up with all types of rationalizations. Oh, they're inferior people, this is what they're, all types of things that you would say to yourself to delude yourself into thinking that slavery wasn't a problem. In many ways, animal agriculture is the basis for so many of our food and clothing decisions today that it's hard for us it's hard for us to conceptualize that maybe there's something wrong with it because we're so dependent on it. But in the same way that once we stopped, let's say, whaling because we had kerosene, we could all of a sudden develop humane sentiment for whales. In the same way that once we no longer were dependent on horses for our transportation because we had a car, now horses are companion animals for the most part. They're not labor animals for us most of the time. And now, the U.S. used to be the biggest whale-killing nation in the world. Now we're among the biggest whale-watching nations in the world. Imagine telling somebody in 1850 that the big industry would be people going out on boats to shoot whales with cameras. Even what a camera was, but think about that. That we have people, and myself included, who have paid just to go watch whales. They would be baffled by that thought. But because we know that whales are actually quite incredible, intelligent creatures who have whole societies down there with language and songs and all that. But if we were still dependent on whales for lighting our homes, I bet it would be very hard for us to accept the scientific reality that the whales are extremely intelligent.
And you bring up a really good analogy as well with slavery as well. Once you move away from the need of, you've built new technology, new systems, you can give legislation purposes to say we no longer need that, put it away, get it done, suffering, it's bad, it's over. So potentially once you get these carneries up and around and people are eating clean meat more, the legislation might go through to completely ban the use of actual animal product.
That seems far off to me, but it doesn't. Far off in terms of the distance. However, you never know what's going to happen. If you had told
people, get to that point in the future,
if you had told people like 200 years ago that we were going to view slavery and child labor as abominations, that the thought of women being denied the right to vote would be completely unethical and anathema, you'd be laughed out of town. The things that we consider today as moral common sense are things that would be so foreign to our ancestors. And so it's difficult for us in 2018 to imagine that world, but maybe the world of 2118, it's not so hard to imagine that.
Exactly. Exactly, and that's why we have these conversations, because when you expand your mind to just 100 years back and analyze, and 100 years forward and analyze in the present moment and get that timeline, it doesn't even seem that far off to really have legislation that says that you can't.
Forget about 100 years ago. 50 years ago, the legitimate debate that was dividing our society was whether whites and blacks ought to be able to use the same water fountain. That's what there's a raucous debate. Today, if you were to take the wrong side on that debate and you were pro-segregation, you'd be socially ostracized. I mean, imagine posting on Facebook that you were for racially segregated water fountains. You would be unfriended. You might even make news. I mean, just for espousing a view that 50 years ago, lots of people in respectable positions of power in our society held that very view. Yet today, thankfully, we view that as totally morally atrocious. So 50 years from now, things that were held as quite normal views to hold, people might be in total revulsion over them. And you take slavery as just one example. I mean, many of the smartest people, Socrates, Aristotle, thought slavery was totally normal and natural. I mean, every human civilization up until recently, for the most part, you had, I mean, from the Greeks to the Romans and the Egyptians, they all had slaves. I mean, anti-slavery sentiment, for the most part, as a mainstream phenomenon, is a relatively new thing, maybe 150 years or so. I mean, really going back to the Enlightenment, so a little bit more than 150 years. But that is something that would have been a laughable view to many people. And now it's the widespread view of probably, at least 9 out of 10 people.
And this sort of thinking is so important. It's the analysis of history and the analysis of culture and how we use tools and systems, and then it's the present moment and analyzing where we are now and thinking about the future and where we want to go. And this timeline view of it is really important for expanding our minds to these new ways of thinking, because we, similarly with how we frown upon what we thought 50 years ago was normal, and now it's like actually will get ostracized. The same thing today. We don't even bat an eyelid for this use of coal and fossil fuels.
That's right.
50 years down the line, you will not be able to dig into the earth for any sort of use of oil or coal to power anything. You will only hopefully be able to use solar or fusion or other forms of sustainable energy. So I love this sort of, it's kind of like the long now thinking, really. It's thinking about society on a 1,000 or 10,000 year timeline, and how important it is to have that sort of thought. Because if all of our minds get expanded to the new dimension of long now thinking, then we think about, 50 years down the line, we're probably not going to be doing this. So it's like the companies eventually end up, the ones that may be racially segregated, or the ones that promote slavery, the ones that were anti-women, or that were that are currently for fossil fuels, or even things like high fructose corn syrup. Even these companies that are currently for these things that are not healthy for society will one day, and this is thanks to Stu Zimmerman, they will one day turn from the caterpillar into the butterfly. They will, evolve, and hopefully peacefully, and hopefully with less havoc with society, to get to that point of being a butterfly, and then it will be without a question what we live and use.
I'm with you, and I think the key to ensuring there's less havoc is to make sure that those who are, let's say, the purveyors of, let's say, meat products today are able to get in on this clean meat revolution.
And that Tyson and Cargill jumped in, and that's
exactly. So the fact that Tyson and Cargill have invested in clean meat is really important for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, you want these companies to be a part of the future. You don't want to fight with them, which will not only delay this future by decades, but also I think might even prevent it, or might have some type of really serious problems. I do want to stress, we're talking about all of these progressions in society, from anti-slavery to women's suffrage to the anti-segregation movement and so on. And it does at least have an implication that there is somehow like a self-executing way that this happens. I don't think that that's true.
You don't think that? Yeah.
I don't think it's true.
You don't think we awaken to higher states of consciousness as we go culturally?
I hope that that's true, but I think there's things that we can do to accelerate the process, and there's things that we can do that decelerate the process.
Yeah.
And so normally, these revolutions occur not just in a self-executing manner. They occur when good people put in the hard work of organizing to make them happen
and inspiring others.
Yeah. So look for example at the advancement of the debate around gay rights in America. I mean, in the 1990s, civil unions was the pro-gay position. Now it's the anti-gay position. Now you see the anti-gay people, just take civil unions. Well, now marriage is the pro-gay position. In fact, it's the law of the land. But just a few years ago, that wasn't the case. And that didn't happen because just magically people became more sympathetic. It happened because there was a very effective gay rights movement with wonderful leadership and like soldiers in that movement, so to speak, who helped push the issue further down the line.
Exactly.
And if they hadn't, maybe it would have still happened, but maybe decades later.
Correct.
And so, I mean, if you look like, let's just say at Reconstruction, like if Reconstruction in America had been allowed to conclude and move on rather than having it ended, you might not have ever needed a civil rights movement 100 years later. So there are ways that we can accelerate these progresses and slow them down as well. And so I just think we are making great progress, but it involves active hard work on the part of those who want to see that progress happening.
You're 100% right. We have the potential to accelerate what we want to build into the world, and by putting together the people and the actions and inspiring others, and even getting in some of these sort of caterpillar organizations to get involved for them to help turn them into butterflies. Otherwise, there could be some combat there, and that combat would slow down the progress. Okay, so I like how we're transitioning to a very how does this variable of animal agriculture play into existence on even the same scale as geopolitics. Quick question, I wanted to ask you this: do you see clean meat in China and Russia and other Europe? Do we see some of that going on in Brazil and other places, India, etc.?
Yeah, so if you look at the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, these are where there's huge population growth in emerging economies, and those are the places where I think clean meat might end up being the most important because you have a lot of people and big demand and increase for meat, big increase in the demand for meat. And so a company like Just, for example, formerly Hampton Creek, is now talking about opening production plants in Asia. I mean, they want to essentially have Chinese production of their products.
Exactly.
Which would be totally stunning because there's so much need there. In fact, one of their early investors was Li Ka-shing, who's a Chinese billionaire. And I think you're going to see a huge push toward these types of food sustainability movements in China. And in fact, in some major cities like Hong Kong and Beijing and Shanghai, you're now seeing the proliferation of vegetarian and vegan restaurants and foods and grocery stores coming out.
In the last decade or so, or in the
in the last few years.
Just few years.
In the last few years.
But that's good.
Yes,
but
it's very good.
Are there clean meat companies being formed in those?
So there are no clean meat companies yet. There is one in Japan, but it is the aspiration of companies like Just to produce clean meat there.
Exactly.
They are eagerly seeking to do it, and I think
this question is very much so rooted in how China is so wanting to get forward in AI or in, genetic engineering, and it's very interesting to think about how the United States and China will interplay within the progress of globalization, what actually occurs. But so that's why I asked about clean meat. Are they also invested into animal agriculture and feeding out how to feed the world as well?
The Chinese are very interested in cellular agriculture and clean meat in general because they view it as a way to help feed a growing population. And so the Chinese government has so far sent signals that it's interested in this. In fact, it had a $300 million deal with a clean tech deal with Israel that a lot of people are hopeful will be moving some of the Israeli clean meat companies into that space. And so,
Israel is big. There was was it the world's first clean meat conference?
The world's first in Israel.
In Israel, there have been other clean meat conferences.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't even know that clean meat conferences was a thing.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, there's been a couple here in San Francisco, but
what are the names of the conferences?
Generally, so New Harvest is an organization that does it, and they just call it like New Harvest Conference. The Good Food Institute is doing one as well.
Cool.
And even going back to 2008.
We love you, Bruce.
Yeah, we love you, Bruce. So the Good Food Institute is doing one upcoming, but even going back a decade ago in Norway in 2008, they had a clean meat conference. It wasn't called clean meat back then.
Okay, cool.
In fact, very amusingly, it was called the Conference for In Vitro Meat, and there was a New York Times columnist who wrote about it, and he had a parenthetical comment saying they might want to do something about that name.
Yeah. Exactly.
But so the idea of a clean meat conference is not necessarily new, but in Israel it was new, and they had this great conference in Haifa where a lot of the leading researchers came together and talked about this, and Israel is a hub of the clean meat industry.
Yeah.
In fact, a major German poultry company, like a Tyson Foods of Germany, just invested in Supermeat, which is Israel's leading clean meat company. So now Israel's leading clean meat company has millions of dollars of investment directly from the meat industry.
Awesome. Yeah. From a German
poultry company.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, it's very like Tyson-esque.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's happening around the world then.
It's amazing.
Awesome. That's kind of what I was hoping to pull out something like that to really show how we are working together in that sense. And there's even an example of another major poultry company around the world investing in clean meat in Israel. That's so great to hear about that.
Yes.
So let's run you through, as we talk about the problems that our world's facing, these major ones, what are your thoughts about maximizing human potential?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, I don't think that my thoughts are that controversial or different from others. I mean, I'm a fan of many of the things that are popular in this space. So I'll give you one example of what I think is one of the most important things that we can do. Providing education and family planning to women around the world who live in developing countries is one of the most important things that we can do at all. Not only so right now in places that have really high fertility rates, women are basically burdened by having to raise multiple kids, and they don't want that many kids. They just don't have access to contraceptives, or culturally they can't get them, or for whatever reasons they don't control their reproductive destiny. And by engaging in low cost or free family planning and providing education for young girls in developing countries where oftentimes they don't get education at all, or if they do, it's dramatically inferior to what boys get, you can not only raise their standard of living but also lower fertility rates so that they have the number of kids they want to have as opposed to having more kids than they want to have, which is a burden for them. And so I think in terms of dollars spent, one of the most important things that we can do is to focus on the plight of girls and women in developing countries, honestly.
That's a really good one that we haven't heard.
Oh, well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's an important way to do everything that we just said.
Yeah. And it does tie into the overall conversation that we do have on the show frequently about how to best raise a child into the world, and how the parent is kind of the god to the child. And so if the parent is educated about these practices that you discuss, especially about things like how to educate their child about evolution, or how to educate them about their internal anatomy and physiology, or how about morality and self-actualization, how to make an impact in the world and be fulfilled. And when these conversations are being had, we end up having, like you're describing, a more well-rounded and educated being come into our world, and then they can teach their children the same principles and stuff.
I think that's very important, and I would just even go just further to say the pathway to escaping poverty is through lower fertility and higher education. Having lots of kids oftentimes sentences women to being in poverty, and to their children therefore being in poverty.
Yes.
And if we can provide education and family planning for those who want it, you don't try to force it on anybody, but those who actually want it, you can do an enormous amount of good. So right now it's estimated there's probably about 300 million women in the world who don't have access to family planning, who want to have fewer children. Think about that from their perspective, and then think about that from the global perspective as well, in an overpopulated world already. And so providing them with the resources that we take for granted, like education and family planning, is one of the most cost-effective ways to improve human potential and actualize it, I think.
Awesome. And then what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
God. There are so many things of great beauty, but I think for me, aside from my wonderful partner, Tony Okamoto, probably the most beautiful thing that I ever look at is when I'm fortunate enough to be in a dark enough sky somewhere without light pollution and can look out on the cosmos and see all of these other stars out there, and knowing that many of them have their own planets circling around them, and that there are probably beings on some of those planets, and thinking about them as really like our interstellar brethren and sistren. So I think about how in my lifetime I may never know them, I may never be able to communicate with them, but I feel quite confident that they're there. And I like to think that, none of us asked to be born. We just arose, not through our own volition, and we're in this cold, hostile, gigantic universe that maybe has some type of cosmic quarantine so we can never actually visit each other, because there's just so the distances are so vast. But thinking that there's somebody else out there, and that maybe they're wondering the same things that we are, or maybe they figured out more than we have, or maybe they are behind us and they are just, don't know anything beyond their own planet. I don't know. But
they're laying down on the grass in their parks at night without light pollution, looking back at you. I would
love that. To me, it would be such a satisfaction thinking about them, and I have a real love for them. I mean, I don't know that they exist. I don't have any way to communicate with them, but I think about them as really like our fellow travelers in this universe, and I really think often about the fact that we aren't alone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so happy that you bring that up regarding the most beautiful thing. It is no light pollution. Looking up at the sky, at the stars is
awe-inspiring.
It's inspiring. It's ego dwarfing.
Yes.
It just makes you really feel the vastness of everything. And I really like how you took us to the perspective of thinking about the other brethren and sistren across the universe, even our galaxy, to hopefully not have that cosmic quarantine, so that we can make a loving connection across the skies, across the deep space.
You don't see in movies, oftentimes that connection is very hostile. We look at other civilizations as being very hostile to our interests.
They're all flying around, pew, pew.
Yeah, right. Although in Contact, the Carl Sagan novel, which was made into a great film, that wasn't so. I mean, they were here to help us. They wanted to give us a roadmap to using wormholes and advancing our own knowledge of basically being able to travel throughout the cosmos. So that's how I would like to think about them. Yeah. But even if they're not, I would still love them. I would still love them because I think they're made from what we are made of. That we may not share a common genetic ancestor in the way that all of us on Earth do, but as the saying goes, they're made from star stuff also. Like the stars that comprise our bodies are the stars that are the same stars comprising their bodies too.
Correct. And then the difference might be carbon-based or DNA.
Maybe they're silicon-based. Maybe they don't have any DNA at all. I don't know. But if they're conscious of anything, they're existing in this universe.
Yes.
And they're contemplating something. Maybe it's where their next meal will come from. Who knows if they even eat? I don't know. Maybe they just photosynthesize. I don't know what they're doing. Yeah. But if they're conscious of anything, I feel a real sense of solidarity with them.
I love that, and I think that's an insanely important part about recognizing that all 7.5 billion of us are in the same tribe. Yeah. Because it shouldn't take seeing an alien to know that we are all one. So your answer, so initially we had the list of simulation questions sometime in the early fall of 2017, and we sent them out to all of our good friends that we thought were global leaders that we wanted to hear their answers to. And Paul answered the question, are we alone in the cosmos? And it's up on our website because it's such a funny answer, with what a waste of space that would be.
It would be a tremendous waste of space. Now, of course, the universe is under no obligation to be an efficient use of space, obviously. But it would be pretty remarkable to think about the vastness of the universe. And then on this one tiny little pale blue dot, to use the Sagan expression, that's where everything is. I mean, it's a very self-aggrandizing view, obviously, to think like that. But I suspect that people like Copernicus and Galileo helped us to recognize that we aren't the center of the physical universe. Right. And I do think that humanity will come to recognize soon that we aren't the center of the moral universe either. Yeah. That others matter too, that other species matter as well.
Yes.
And we're undergoing kind of like a Copernican revolution, not in terms of the physical universe, but in terms of our own ethical universe, of who we consider as being worthy of being within that circle of moral concern.
Yes.
It used to be that the only beings inside of that circle of moral concern were maybe our family or our tribe, and then you expand it out, and now you're talking about maybe your nationality or your religion, and then you get out to being to the point where today, where a lot of people would say, oh, well, it doesn't matter what your race or nationality or religion or sexual orientation. If you're Homo sapiens, you're in the circle. And I'd suggest that's good, and many others would suggest that's good, but we can go further. And if you can feel pain, if you're conscious of anything, then you have interests that matter, and we ought to consider those interests and put that within our circle of moral concern. And that's why, in the same way that I would have love for those theoretical aliens circling other suns out there, I feel that way about non-human animals here on Earth too. Correct. That they're just here traveling on this little watery rock going around our star in the same way that you and I are. And they didn't ask to be here either. They were born, and we're going to arise and go away like that. From from the grand perspective, we're here for the blink of an eye.
Correct.
And so, I think about, there is this type of solidarity that we should feel with these other beings who happen to be traveling on this path at the same time that we are. And I think about that for the chickens and the pigs and the cows, but also for the whales and even the rats and other animals who are here with us.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a way, I mean, I think in the past people have generally viewed animals as being here for us, and I think generally speaking in the future we may view them as not being here merely for us, but being here with us. And that's a radically different way to look at things. But I think that for so long we have viewed animals merely as commodities to be exploited by humanity for whatever whim we want, whether it's food or clothing or even something as trivial as our own amusement. I mean, think about the fact that we've tormented wild animals and beaten them into submission to perform in circuses for our entertainment. I mean, that's something that is hard to even imagine that we ever considered acceptable.
In zoos, yeah.
And so in the future, though, I think that we'll have a healthier view of animals, and frankly a healthier view of ourselves, because it doesn't do us many favors to think of ourselves as the apex of all creation, as the lords who can serve as tyrants over everybody else. Correct. I think a humbler view of ourselves is probably healthier for us.
Definitely.
Not only more accurate, but healthier for us too.
Totally healthier for us, yeah. And the ego dwarfing with the stars and all that good stuff will help us get there. Yeah. I actually just want to say I had one of my friends showed me a photo of him at a zoo in Disney, and it was a massive open zoo. It wasn't closed, at least, but he showed me the photo of a gorilla from far away. And I zoomed and I zoomed and I zoomed on the gorilla's face. And it was still high enough fidelity for me to look at the gorilla's eyes. And the gorilla was looking right at the car that was moving.
Oh.
And the look on that gorilla was like that. It was like it was kind of like I see what's going on. And
Yeah.
I recognize you.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, like, you know, what crime did that gorilla commit to be incarcerated? I mean, for us to go gawk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly incredible. Now, you know, in some cases, for animals who are extremely endangered and there's no habitat left for them, it's one thing. But most animals in captivity don't fall under that category.
Yeah. This is so amazing what we've covered. Let's do. Are we in a computer simulation?
A lot of smart people certainly think so. It's hard to argue against. I don't know. If we are, I really wish that the creator of that simulation might try to intervene for our benefit, because it doesn't look like she, he, or it is doing that.
And what would the creator of the simulation be? To you,
Yeah.
what would that look like?
Who knows? Maybe it's like some fourth grader's science project. I mean, it could be anything. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it to us. I mean, we are so little. We're so finite. We're so frail. I mean, it's hard for us even to imagine it. I mean, I frankly don't know. I mean, I think about it and what it might be like, but it could just be like some kid's science experiment, some alien kid's science experiment who created us to see what would happen.
So I do hope that the intervention of a programmer or simulator or whoever this being is that could have manifested what we exist in, I hope that the intervention is benign, and potentially beneficial, but at the same time, even if there isn't one, it's probably the coolest experiment ever conducted, because the evolution of these thinking species that can contemplate something like simulation theory, and then seeing how they work together, if they blow themselves up, if not, their proximity to the star, all these variables that can be tweaked.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, so you just think about it like math and physics and variables that can be tweaked, and then the mass of the planet, its proximity to the star, how bright the star is, how the evolution actually occurred on the planet, if they're carbon-based life, if they're DNA-coded life, and then things like the asteroid colliding 65 million years ago, enabling us to actually evolve.
Right.
So all these variables, they're so fun to be able to tweak, and then those variables are changed, like you said, when you look up at night at the stars, those variables are changed for the other rock orbiting the star, and then for the other rock, and etc.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable to think that evolution has produced an animal that can know evolution. That that is a remarkable thing. Or even to think about the stars produced an animal that can contemplate the stars and that can know what they're made of.
Fascinating.
And that is a mind-boggling thing to contemplate.
Yes. And I hope that conversations like this can really drive more people to think in this way. Yeah. Amazing. Evolution and stars, and we are now able to think about them. That this happened and now we're able to think about them. If we can get more people, the premise of what we're doing with simulations, so that we can get more people to have these thought-provoking conversations and try and build the future together.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I am impressed about your work by, Alan, is that a lot of people are very good at pointing out what problems are. Not as many people are as good as trying to theorize and talk about what solutions there might be. And it's very easy to identify problems, but being what my friend Zoe Weil calls a solutionary, somebody who looks for solutions.
Solutionary?
Yes.
I love that.
Cool. Zoe Weil is a great person. She runs the Institute for Humane Education. She's done a number of TEDx talks that I recommend, but solutionary is a term that she coined for people who look for solutions to problems, not just those who identify problems. And I think of you as a solutionary and trying to examine not just what are the problems, but what can we actually do about it? What can we actually do?
Yeah. And how can we do it together with all of the different leaders across industries, with all the different unique perspectives across places in the world? Because that will then amplify the creativity from all the different journeys. I think of you as a solutionary as well. I really like that word. Thanks for teaching us that. That's a crucial point. Is identify the multivariate problem, and then also have a deep desire to converse with people about the solutions. So amazing. Paul Shapiro, this has been a pleasure.
It's my honor, Alan.
We can find Clean Meat across Amazon. You want to list them off?
Everywhere that you get books, but if you want to easily get it, just go to cleanmeat.com. And you can see all the places you can look, you can buy it, you can check it out. I have a TEDx talk on the topic as well. But just go to cleanmeat.com and you can check out everything about the book and the topic.
Exactly. And then make sure when you go through, make sure to give it a nice, highlight as you read.
Nice.
Make sure you're writing down key points. And make sure you're trying to, one of our previous simulations recently, we had Chester Santos, a U.S. memory champion, who was teaching us about once you go through the process of taking the note, make sure to visualize the note in your mind and add new senses to it so that you can really retain that information.
Yeah, you can create a little Clean Meat memory palace.
A Clean Meat memory palace. That was perfectly said. And join us, Paul Shapiro, on Twitter at
Paul H. Shapiro.
At Paul H. Shapiro, and all these links will be in the bio as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys had a fun time, if you guys found this content useful, please do give us a like, give us a comment down below, subscribe, share the content with other people, let us know your thoughts about it. And join us on Patreon. You get great benefits like being able to ask our guests questions. You get benefits like access to live events ahead of time, access like being able to join the community, join the conversation at a deeper level. We have a bunch of different reward tiers. Go check it out.
And the moral satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to good in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. We greatly appreciate that. We have this nice studio space that we need to maintain now and be able to provide for a safe and comfortable environment for our guests. Big shout out to our producer and director, Ron Vargas. He's been doing an amazing job with us. And thank you very much, Paul. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Alan, it's mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.